Scanning for audio.
Welcome to the latest Tin Dog podcast, which I believe is number 88. Recorded ridiculously early in the morning. And before I start my review of the big science fiction event of this Easter, and I start talking about the fan favourite conversation Season 6B, I just want to take a few moments to thank absolutely everyone who's emailed me with notes of congratulation about Verity's arrival. It really means a lot that people care so much. Thank you. Now, when I say the science fiction event of the Easter, I'm not talking about POTD, the latest Doctor Who story. No, I'm talking about something that I was actually looking forward to slightly more. Now, I know this is a Doctor Who podcast, but the fanboy in me isn't just a fan of Doctor Who. I mean, of course, Red Dwarf. Red Dwarf's return on the digital TV channel Dave. 3 episodes and a making of were specially commissioned in order to be broadcast over Easter. And I hope you don't mind indulging me for just a moment or two while I talk about Red Dwarf, rather than our beloved guy in the blue box. If you do want to hear my immediate reactions about Planet of the Damned, then I suggest you nip over to the WhoCast, episode 114, and listen to my gut reactions immediately after seeing the show. There will be a much more in-depth Tin Dog podcast on the show once it comes out on DVD later on next month. I think it's set for release on the 25th, so I'm sure I'll be covering it then. A long, long time ago, in a world called the BBC, a small TV show was invented that owed a lot to fellow sci-fi. Basically, the plot was very similar to Alien. Someone has a cat on board the ship. It's a mining vessel, and things go wrong. That's where the similarities with Alien end until you get to Series 3 and Polymorph. But Red Dwarf was especially loved for the first 4 series. Some people loved it for the entire run. The adventures of Dave Lister, Arnold J. Rimmer, Kat, Holly, regardless of which Holly you loved, and eventually Kachansky and a lot of others, probably a random Kachansky in all fairness, spawned the sort of fandom that was more akin to Hitchhiker's Guide than to Doctor Who. These fans would drink heavily and would laugh loudly. I met some of my best friends through Red Dwarf fandom, and indeed at one point I formed the Red Dwarf fan club. Admittedly, at exactly the same time, someone called Nick had formed another Red Dwarf fan club, so I returned all of my fees and handed on all of the information across to Nick, who then went on to run it, assuming that I'd be much better off just sitting back and watching the show. I had nothing further to do with the Red Dwarf fan club in that sense, beyond handing over all the paperwork, but my love for the show didn't go away. And so when Back to Earth was announced, I was a very happy man, because all I really wanted was the narratives to finish, all the loose ends to be sewn up, everyone to get home, and I wanted that happy ending. I wanted everyone to live happily ever after. I'm a pushover for that sort of stuff. Yes, I know, narratively speaking, as soon as the guy gets the girl or the person reaches their goal, narratively speaking, things are over, but that's fine, because this was going to be the very end of Red Dwarf. We wanted closure. This story really does split into 3 very, very different parts, but as an overall narrative, it does work. Different from early Red Dwarf, which was a lot more akin to, say, Steptoe and Son in Space, where people would just argue and bicker, and they were my favourite episodes. Things like Marooned, where 2 of the characters were trapped and just had to deal with their emotions and their own personal histories, were wonderful tales but couldn't be mined too deeply, otherwise the series would have just ended even sooner. I was never a fan of the giantly madcap stories. Dancing blue midgets were never my forte. I liked the fact that it was cerebral and dealt with things. My all-time favourite episode, The Last Day, where Troughton says, "So this is what it's like to be alive. I want more. It's not enough," will always make me have the slightest of tears in my eyes. But we're not talking about the past. We're talking about these 3 final stories. Alright, the cast are looking a little bit older, which for a dead man who's a hologram, that's slightly impressive. But which Rimmer is this? Is this the hologram of the last Rimmer? The one who was alive, who was rebuilt by nanobots? I'm guessing it is, which allowed the character to be completely reset, and that's fine. We won't even discuss where the light bee was, because this is science fiction and I'm sure we can come up with such things. Let's just assume Crichton built another one. There were two things missing from this Red Dwarf special. The first was there was no Holly. Hattie Hayridge or Norman Lovett just were nowhere to be seen. They weren't even on Earth as human beings, seen in passing. This upset me because Holly was one of my all-time favourite characters. Queeg ranks with one of the all-time classic tales, and Norman Lovett's performances are very, very good. Either way, the decision just to pare down the show to its core values was quite brave. Getting rid of Holly might not have been the best decision from a fan's point of view, but you have to remember that these episodes were 5 minutes shorter than ever they would have appeared on BBC Two. The reason for that? Dave, a digital channel, has commercials. Now I know everyone outside the UK goes, what's your problem with commercials? But those extra 5 minutes of character development are what make BBC sitcoms so much better than ITV ones. And so the first episode, the one screened on Good Friday, was a lot more close to classic Red Dwarf, a ship-bound, almost bottle episode, bringing the audience up to date with the things so far. Felt like ordinary Dwarf. It felt like Series 4 was fairly madcap and slightly slapstick, but it didn't feel out of place as a Red Dwarf episode. None of these three did. But by far the greatest thing was how great the series looked. The ship itself was a reworking of the Dwarf from Series 1, 2, 3, 4, well, right up to when they lost it and Starbug drifted off. It wasn't the enormous long space freighter mining core thing, the large metal sausage with the scoop on the end. No, this was proper hardcore sci-fi, the hollowed out asteroid that was Series 1. But it looked so good. CGI has come so far, and I know that this has been made on HD, but wasn't broadcast on HD, and such things have paid off. Virtual sets blended seamlessly into rebuilds of the crew's quarters. This is what Red Dwarf looks like when you're a Doctor Who fan, in your head. Because you're very forgiving of slightly dodgy effects or dodgy CSO outlines. The model work on original Red Dwarf was wonderful. Massively underrated, because it was a comedy show. But it wasn't just comedy, it was sci-fi as well. Episode 2, set more cleanly on Earth, had more of a runaround feel. The whole crossover between our reality, that's the viewer's reality, and the Dwarf reality on the show had been done before. It felt very, very much like the League of Gentlemen Apocalypse, but this was done, I'm not sure it was done better or worse, but it was done differently. I can live with that. It was done in a definite Red Dwarf way, and it didn't feel like any of the better-than-life scenarios that we'd come across in the show so many times before. Because the virtual reality tricking them into thinking that the storyline was all over, Better Than Life or the Despair Squid stories and all of those, even the Gunmen of the Apocalypse, were all variants on a theme. What is real? Which is the sort of question that Red Dwarf had poised slightly more than any other sci-fi show. And that was at its core. That's what it's all about. That was Red Dwarf at its best. So I don't blame them for going there again. Visiting a world, our world, where Red Dwarf was a phenomenon, was quite a nice idea. And given again the 25-minute format, I didn't really have major issues, but it did feel like it had been done elsewhere, and it had been done elsewhere quite recently. Of course, the League of Gentlemen storyline was taken from other places. There's a very old play called Four Characters in Search of an Author, which obviously has its relations here. And then we come to how much Blade Runner it was referencing. Now, I love Blade Runner just as much as the next sci-fi fan, so I don't have massive issues with it. Of course, it is an exceptionally old film, which means everyone will have seen it. And the references along the lines of, I only do eyes, and the guy saying, I only do noses, was classic wacky Dwarf. But perhaps Dwarf needs its two writers to work together, rather than just the one. I don't know what the writing dynamic is. Does one do most of the work and the other one tweaks it with extra jokes, like some of the Pythons used to do? Or do they split the work firmly down the middle? Could Llewellyn have helped out? Because I'm sure he penned some of the episodes earlier. Before I talk about my allotted topic this week, which is going to be Series 6B of Doctor Who, Yeah, I'll get back to that in a moment. I just want to say that in the next fortnight, I'll be attending the Doctor Who event at Fab Cafe. Now, in order to make myself slightly more obvious, I've got a T-shirt with Tin Dog Podcast on the front. So, if you're a listener and you want to say hello, just come over and say hello. The event runs at the Fab Cafe in Manchester from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. The Colin Baker and the Sylvester McCoy will be there, as well as Mark Strickson, Sophie Aldred and a host of others. I think Toby Haydock's going as well. There are some tickets still available, so if you find yourself, at a loose end, I'm sure you can find it. I'll put a link to the event on the show notes at tin-dog.co.uk. And so onwards, ever onwards, to Series 6B. In these days of Big Finish, we're all very, very used to Doctor Who stories that take place in apparent gaps in the TV stories. There's entire seasons that take place between Tegan leaving for the first time and Tegan arriving back in what appeared on TV to be the next episode. So we're all kind of more than willing to believe in the existence of missing stories. The Doctor, a notorious name-dropper, often talks about things which apparently had happened off-screen, in adventures that apparently didn't contain aliens. A fan theory exists about something called Series 6B. Basically, a series that's never been seen, that exists between the end of the Troughton era and the beginning of the Pertwee era. But why should such an idea exist? Well, it mainly comes from two very specific sources, the 5 Doctors and the 2 Doctors. Now, in reality, of course, the reason that the Series 6B theory exists is because the people in charge of continuity really kind of dropped the ball. They weren't paying attention and they let things slide. But we're not interested in reality. We're Doctor Who fans. You see, in the 5 Doctors, the 2nd Doctor sees the apparent ghosts of his companions.
What's that? We'll go and see. Good grief.
Jamie! Zoe! Stay back, Doctor! Why, what's happening?
Don't come any closer! There's a force field!
A force field?
Well, sincere about that.
No, don't, Doctor! If the force field is disturbed, it'll destroy us!
You must go back!
Well, Doctor, what are we going to do?
Get them out of it! No, please don't, Doctor!
Oh, go back! Save yourselves!
I can't leave you there!
You must!
We could find another way into the tomb area.
Zoe and Jamie would still be trapped. The Brigadier's right. Or would they? Just a minute. It's a matter of memory.
Stay away!
Why? I can't harm you.
The one step nearer and we're dead.
You can't kill illusions.
The Brigadier!
You're not real. When you were returned to your own people, the Time Lords erased your memory of the period you spent with me. So how do you know who we are? Answer!
We've gone.
Yes, it's sad.
I still don't like it, Doctor, and I don't fully understand why we're here.
You want to get home?
Of course.
That is why we're here. Come along.
Now, if the storyline had taken place, say, during the 2nd Doctor's time, he wouldn't know about their eventual fate. If it had taken place after the 2nd Doctor's time, it wouldn't be the 2nd Doctor who meets them in the corridor. So, we're dealing with a 2nd Doctor who can A, control the TARDIS, which he couldn't do at the time, in order to attend the Brigadier's retirement, and B, we're dealing with a 2nd Doctor who has knowledge after his trial. That's the first hint. As well as the 5 Doctors, we have the 2 Doctors. Again, the 2nd Doctor turns up.
Come here, Jamie. Look at that.
Look at the size of that thing, Doctor.
Yes, Jamie, that is a big one.
Just a wee laboratory, eh?
Well, it's obviously it's grown.
It's like 20 castles in the sky. Are you sure we've come to the right place?
Of course I am.
We don't usually get to where you say we're going.
I got Victoria to where she wanted to go. Why she wants to learn graphology, I have no idea.
Ah. Will we ever get back to her, though?
Of course we will.
I'll believe that when I see it.
At the moment, we have other things to worry about. Look at this.
What? Hey, I've not seen that before.
It's not been here before. It's a teleport control. You'd think I never flown a TARDIS solo.
What's it do?
It gives the Time Lords dual control. Infernal cheek. I shall complain when this is over. Now then, I think we'll just dematerialize to avoid their detection beams and slip in quietly.
And here he's travelling just with Jamie, something that didn't happen during his time. They're told that Victoria's off studying graphology and they're going to go back and pick her up. Again, the Doctor has more control over his TARDIS. But most important, Jamie knows of the existence of the Time Lords, which of course he didn't know. They're doing a job for the Time Lords. Does this mean that this story takes place after the trial? It could. Now, the last piece of evidence isn't on TV and only exists in book form. This isn't the first time I've tried to talk about Series 6B. I actually tried some time ago, but I lost most of the files when transferring from one machine to another. The only thing that survived was this reading from Terence Dix's novel, which I'll play for you now.
Urgent subspace communication incoming.
The following is an excerpt from the genuine and original summary record of the trial of the Doctor. The account with which we were until now familiar was substantially re-edited for public record. The true record has recently been released under the provision of the Gallifreyan Freedom of Information Act. In the High Court of the Time Lords, a trial was coming to its end. The accused, a renegade Time Lord known as the Doctor, had already been found guilty. Now it was time for the sentence. The Doctor looked very out of place, standing amongst the Time Lords in their long white robes. To begin with, he was quite a small man. He wore an ancient black coat and a pair of check trousers. He had a gentle, rather comical face, and a shock of untidy black hair. But there was strength in his face too, and keen intelligence in his blue eyes. A hush fell as the president of the court rose and began to speak. "Doctor, you have been found guilty of 2 serious offences against our laws. First, you stole a TARDIS and used it to roam through time and space as you pleased." "Nonsense," said the Doctor indignantly. "I didn't steal it. I just borrowed it for a while." The President ignored the interruption. "More importantly, you have repeatedly broken our most important law. Interference in the affairs of other planets is a serious crime." Again the Doctor interrupted. "I not only admit my interference, I am proud of it. You observe the evil in the galaxies. I fight against it. We have considered your plea, Doctor, that there is evil in the universe, which must be fought, and that you still have a part to play in the great struggle. It is a plea not without merit." The President paused, and then he said heavily, "Regrettably, this court's hands are tied. The abstraction of an obsolete TARDIS is a relatively trivial matter. Temporal interference, however, prolonged and repeated temporal interference, is far more serious matter. It strikes at the root of our Time Lord policy of non-interference. In the affairs of the cosmos, it draws attention to our very existence, and for many years our safety has lain in silence and secrecy. In short, aggravated temporal interference of this nature is a capital crime, and the sentence is mandatory. It is my painful duty, Doctor, to sentence you to death."
Urgent subspace communication incoming.
And so the second Doctor is sentenced to death. However, some other little jobs come up. Some other renegades are messing about with history, and the second Doctor, in order to prove himself worthy of survival, basically becomes an agent for the Time Lords, just like we see in the 2 Doctors, and is allowed to travel back in time to try and fix things. It's a wonderful novel. It's written by Terence Dix, who is the Doctor Who fan equivalent of J.K. Rowling, and something I must admit I would recommend you try and track down. And so what do I think of Series 6B? Well, on one hand, it's kind of made up for television, but on the other hand, it's something that we can embrace as Doctor Who fans. Okay, so Big Finish will never get round to making the audios. They can't get the casting. They can't even make Series 6B Unbound, no matter how much I'd like them to, although Fraser Hines could do one as a companion chronicle. But hey, it's something nice that we can chat about. And after all, isn't that part of being a Doctor Who fan? So until next time, be seeing you. And so that's the evidence. You have been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.